Thank you, Tim. Just a quick sound check. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. Well, thank you for having me. I'm sorry I'm not there in person, but I appreciate the introduction, Tim. You bring up a good point. When we look at healthcare and look around, you see all this growth. You know, the question is really, why is this happening? And what does it all mean? Is it going to be sustainable going forward? How does it affect the rest of our economic sector? And those are some of the things I'm going to talk about today. To answer the why right off the bat, it's about access to healthcare services. And as you're going to see today in some of the data we have at my organization, workforce and opportunity are going to be the themes that are going to really jump out at you. So if we take a look here and get started. So when Tim reached out to me, he said he didn't want to talk about COVID. I said, that makes two of us. Unfortunately, the world pulls us back and forth. But the good news is today we will just talk about the economic side of healthcare. And when he talked about wanting to understand, you know, what is, with all the growth around healthcare, you know, have you guys looked at this? Have you thought about it? It was very timely because my association actually commissioned a study to look at the healthcare economic sector, economic impact, and more specifically, what our workforce statistics are and how they can weigh to the rest of the state and the rest of the country. And the reason we did that is we've known in healthcare that for years, having access to talent, local talent, and our workforce has been significantly challenging. We do not have enough people going into healthcare to maintain basic access to services. And it requires us to look to more costly models, especially out-of-state models. And so we commissioned the study because we've always known this in the healthcare sector. I'm sure many people have known it outside the sector, but we've never taken the time to really define it as of late. And that's what we did. And it's especially interesting because the last 2 years with the pandemic, workforce shortages have been highlighted. They've been on full display. And the effect of those shortages have also been on display. You know, we can't function at a high level as a healthcare system to respond in crisis if we don't have the right people inside our hospitals. Stated differently, we could build every type of hard infrastructure, healthcare model, facility, whatever you want to call it, in the world, but it makes no difference if we don't have the human capital in place to actually run our facilities. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So let's start with the industry profile. First thing I'm going to say, obviously, representing hospitals and nursing homes, we have the data to back this up, but healthcare is critical to the economic sector in Alaska. We are, in many respects, the biggest sector now in Alaska because we pay out more wages than any other industry in Alaska. We pay out about 11% of all state wages, and that translated to about $2.7 billion to our workers in 2019. And I know right away some people will go, healthcare is too expensive, cost of care, you're a drag on the economy. Well, first of all, we do agree the cost of care is too expensive, but the statistics I'm talking about today don't really get at that. Cost of care question is a whole different problem. It's something we agree on that needs to be lower. What we're talking about today are the personnel we need to maintain basic access to healthcare services. Not, you know, frivolous things, shiny things. We're talking about access to care in your community, on the Kenai Peninsula, and of course in Alaska by and large. So when I say we're good for the economy, what I'm talking about is our multiplier effect. If you just start with the hospital sector, that's the most obvious place to look. For each for each job that we create in the hospital sector, 0.84 jobs are created elsewhere in Alaska businesses and industries. Same thing with every dollar of income we generate and pay out. That creates 50 cents in other Alaska businesses and industries. So it's that downstream effect that if you take this in total and take a step back, not just the hospital sector, healthcare is much bigger than that, we actually have a pretty significant footprint. So the healthcare footprint today as it stands is about 42,900 jobs, 2.7 billion in annual income. Well, if you take that multiplier effect across the entire industry, we represent almost 75,000 total jobs and nearly $4 billion in total income to the state's economy. That's pretty noteworthy. Healthcare is a stable sector, it's a growing sector, and it's an important sector. So let's talk about performance and outlook. I just made all those statements. It's stable, it's growing. Well, let's start with some basic historic performance. If you look over the last 4 years, our 4-year performance shows 6% overall job growth. So we've been growing. We also have 21% wage growth. That's good and bad. It's good from the standpoint that we're a healthy sector, that we're growing, that there's opportunity. It's bad from the standpoint that we're probably paying too much for some of our personnel services. And I'm not talking about Alaskans here at home. I'm talking about our need to rely on out-of-state workers and going to that well. And we'll talk about that more in the next slide or two. But the bottom line is, historically, we have seen continued growth, both on the wage standpoint and job growth. Now, looking forward, the question is this supposed to continue? And the answer is yes. And these aren't our projections. These are the state of Alaska's projections. 7.6% projected growth over the next 10 years. What does that mean? That means we're going to be adding over 5,000 new healthcare jobs in the economy here in Alaska. That's more than any other sector in Alaska. Now, if you look at, all right, are these good jobs, bad jobs? This is kind of an unfair metric, but it kind of gets to the point. So I feel like it's important to use it. The average annual salaries, if you take all healthcare jobs, the really high ones and the really low ones, and you average them out, we have an average annual healthcare wage of about $65,700 per year. It's a good paying job. And I'm going to show that, even though that's an average and is not totally representative, I'm going to show there really is vast opportunity here. So let's talk about that. What are we talking about opportunity? What are the key positions? What are the key employers? Well, by no surprise, hospitals are the largest healthcare employers in Alaska. We employ 35% of all healthcare workers, and we cover 42% of all healthcare wages. So when you look in your backyard where you guys are today, and you look to Central Peninsula Hospital, and you see the campus growth and their ability to provide you access to services, they're a key employer. I know you guys already know this, but it's important for us to talk about it on a statewide basis. Hospitals are key employers in Alaska, especially in healthcare. Now, the dominant workforce, what do we always talk about? Sure, we talk about doctors, but during the pandemic, we've talked a lot about nurses. Well, nurses, for good reason, are our dominant workforce here. That's the largest pool of healthcare workers, and I'm saying registered nurses. There's other kinds of nurses, but I'm just focusing on RNs. The RNs receive 18% of all healthcare wages in Alaska, and that's almost $500 million in 2020 standards. Now, the interesting thing here is, how do we compare to the rest of the country in terms of nurses per capita or per 100,000? How do we compare for other positions? The interesting thing to us is we talk about nurses because we have such a shortage. I mean, look at what we're doing with the state of Alaska right now. Granted, it's pandemic related, but staffing shortages have always been an issue. We're working with the state to have actually emergency personnel up here on temporary assignment to help us respond to the pandemic. Many of that personnel are nurses. I say that because if you look at our RNs in Alaska and compare us to the rest of the country, we actually have a very similar prevalence rate. Meaning, the nurse snapshot here is going to be very similar to every other state. The problem is, as we all know, there's a national shortage, if not global shortage, for nurses. So we really feel the pain here at home. Now, looking at other positions, if you can see on this graph, if you can't, I'm going to highlight a few of them for you. At the bottom, a critical job class that is really underrepresented are nursing assistants. And we think of those as certified nursing assistants, CNAs. That is like the critical lifeblood for the healthcare personnel, especially in nursing homes and even on hospital floors. To have an adequate supply of CNAs allows you to staff appropriately, economically, and in a way that allows you to keep up with services. We're way below the national average, if you see that, almost at the bottom there in this chart. Other thing that jumps out in terms of opportunities and where we're really low compared to the rest of the country, radiology techs. Radiology techs, those are the people that run the machines in the radiology department. You go get a scan or an x-ray or an image. Believe it or not, especially what we've seen over the last 2 years with the pandemic, where we're really vulnerable is if we have our staff call in sick or they can't come to work. You can wipe out the entire radiology department if your techs can't come to work. You may have your radiologists, the doctors available to do the reads, but if you don't have people to run the machines, you grind to a halt. Well, that's another point, is we're really low compared to the rest of the country for rad techs. Same thing for respiratory therapists. RTs have been a very widely talked about position during the pandemic because of treatment options and the need to focus on the lungs and pulmonary infections. Respiratory therapists are almost impossible to find these days, especially here in Alaska. And then finally, pharmacy techs. I mean, these are just a handful of positions we've highlighted here to compare ourselves to other states. And it goes to show we really come up short. And that kind of gets to the narrative and the economic effect that we'll talk about next. It's really the opportunities and the threats. Now, when I thought about this slide and building it for you guys, I thought, oh, do I do a SWOT analysis to try and look smart here and do this grid, strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats? But when it comes to workforce and healthcare, we really we're at the bottom of the barrel on so many of these measures that you almost have to look at it as sheer opportunity. If you look at it as a challenge, it's going to be extremely overwhelming. So let me show you what I mean by that. First and foremost, our job demand significantly exceeds our labor supply, and that's going to apply anywhere. And I think that's safe to say it's going to apply on the Kenai Peninsula. And I know so from talking to Central Peninsula Hospital and, of course, South Peninsula Hospital in Homer. Every year in Alaska, on a statewide basis, in healthcare, we have 6,300 openings just to staff positions for access to services, just to be whole. So that means these positions, based on growth, churn, other reasons, they're coming up. So 6,300 vacancies get created. That's not the type of thing where you can shift one person from one healthcare job to another and you've solved it. You still have that vacancy. So we have to find 6,300 people in some way, shape, or form every year to be made whole. And now more than 1,400 of those openings are for the RN position alone. So that's a huge hole right there to just try and keep up with demand. Now, what do we do? How do you solve that? Do we have enough people in state? I'm going to show you the answer is no. So where are we forced to look? We're forced to look out of state. Now, out of state workforce is not a bad thing. It's a necessary thing. But if you become overly reliant on it, it really drives up the cost of care quickly because it's so expensive. So 11.3% of our total healthcare workforce today in Alaska, they're non-residents. And only about a quarter of them actually go on to stay on a permanent basis. Now, I think you're hearing from a lot of industries today, we can all agree on when it comes to recruiting, we can probably all be pretty effective with recruiting out of state and getting people up here, but it's extremely challenging to actually retain those people. Obviously, you have to kind of have Alaska is very different than the rest of the country, as we all know. So to get someone to come here, it sounds great on paper. The adventure is great. Once they go through their first winter, they're gone, and you're back to square one. So we are looking out of state. We do have travelers. I'm sure that's a term that people have become familiar with because we rely on those staff to fill our holes just because we can't produce enough at home. But based on a survey back in 2019 in Southeast, we're showing that it costs 64% more on average to engage a traveling healthcare worker than to just hire someone permanently and local. That's very disproportionate, and it creates a big problem, and that's something we have to solve. So in looking at our job demand exceeding labor supply and looking out of state, how we're kind of bringing 11.3% of our workforce is from out of state, is it enough? How short are we coming up? One way to answer that is we actually surveyed all of our hospitals and nursing homes over a course of a year. And we said, take these key position types, which just give them a handful, including nurses, RTs, rad techs, all those positions that I talked about earlier. And we said, tell us, how often are these open? What is the vacancy rate? And secondly, how long does it take to recruit? Is it hard? Well, based on that survey, we found that on average, on any single day of the year, we were running about a 21% vacancy rate. That means 21% of healthcare jobs in hospitals and nursing homes are open, sitting vacant every single day of the year. That's a real problem when you're trying to keep up with demand for services. And not only that, I don't have it displayed here on the screen, but the time it takes to recruit these positions, it's not, a month. It's not even 45 days. It's 3 months to 6 months and even beyond. And even when we find this personnel, the time it takes to license some of them because of some of the archaic processes in the state takes another set of 3 to 6 to 9 months. So our ability to actually get people in the positions to fill these vacancies, which are happening every single day, is severely limited. And then on top of that, the other thing we know is if we look at home, what programs, we have really good programs for churning out workforce for all of these jobs, but they're operating, many of them are operating well below potential. And here's a good example. The state's biggest nursing program in the state, the College of Nursing at UAA, this is no fault of their own, this is a national problem too. For every person, every eligible student they seat in their nursing program, they are turning away 2 eligible candidates who could be sitting there. Not 2 random people, who put in an application, 2 people who would be accepted, who qualify the program, and who are believed to be successful and complete the program should they be accepted. The reason they're turning away 2 students for every one is because they have faculty constraints, other constraints along with it. But the bottom line is, think about that. We could be producing 200% more nurses from that program alone. And I can tell you right now, from a hospital and nursing home standpoint, and I think Central Peninsula Hospital and Homer, South Peninsula Hospital would both agree, we can hire every single one of them tomorrow in our industry. The need is that great. So what I leave you with today, and hopefully I give you a few minutes back because I know you guys were running a little bit behind, is healthcare is critical to the economy. And it's not surprising you're seeing the growth that you are because we're starting to evolve our ability to have access to services in your home region, rather than just having this kind of centralized model in the bigger areas in Florida now. But more importantly, the opportunities for employment and the critical nature of employment are endless. And that is where we believe, in terms of return on investment or ROI, that's what we should be doing in Alaska. If we invest in our talent pipeline to getting people into these jobs, we're gonna have more Alaskans at work. We're gonna have people staying home, not leaving the state. It's gonna be a lot cheaper to bring down the cost of care. Everybody wins in that situation. So thank you for having me here today. I obviously can't see you guys. It's a dark screen on my end. Hopefully you guys didn't all fall asleep. Hopefully some of this made sense, but I appreciate the opportunity, and I know I'm not supposed to field questions, but happy to do so if there's any.
Thank you, Jared. We appreciate you.